It's a real pleasure to follow John. And you know, the next time you hear Tory MPs or others attacking trade unions, just remember and remind them of the fantastic campaign by Osdor, CW and others who have fought on behalf of the innocent victims of crime. Conference, at the next election, Labour's challenge is to spell out how we are the One Nation party, how we will repair this Tory-led government's damage to everything from the economy to unemployment, the NHS to children's services, safer communities to access to justice, the way we do politics to constitutional reform. But I want to begin by asking you to join me in thanking my excellent team, Wayne David, Andy Slaughter, Jenny Chapman, Rob Flello, Jeremy Beecham, Diane Hayter and Alex Cunningham for all their hard work. We know that committing Labour to policies it can't deliver is a mistake. That's this Tory-led government's approach, over-promising and under-delivering. Promising to cut prison numbers, but they've actually risen. Promising to build more prisons, but then cancelling the prison building programme. Promising a rehabilitation revolution, but prison conditions are more overcrowded than ever. Promising to be on the side of victims, but then cutting funding for victim support, and as John highlighted, slashing compensation to 46% of innocent victims of crime. Promising to keep the most violent and persistent offenders off our streets, but then abolishing indeterminate sentences, key in keeping the most dangerous offenders off our streets and safely in prison. Promising to protect civil liberties, but extending secrecy in our courts. And promises from Nick Clegg, yes, promises from Nick Clegg to be the great reformer in constitutional reform. But he fluffed voting reform, and his half-baked proposals to reform the House of Lords were scuppered by the Tories he props up. And let's not forget this government's self-serving and partisan boundary changes. They think they are the One Nation party. Don't make me laugh. Call me old-fashioned, but I think voters should decide the outcome of general elections, not Tory or Lib Dem party managers gerrymandering constituencies for their own purpose. Nick Clegg opposing the boundary changes is one promise I hope he does keep. Because of this government's broken promises, progress we made in cutting crime, cutting first-time offending, and cutting re-offending are all in jeopardy. And you know, Dennis Skinner is right. Dennis Skinner is right, as he almost always is. David Cameron does what people like him always do when things go wrong. He sacks the help. His Justice Secretary, Ken Clarke, sacked. All his junior justice ministers sacked. But will their policies be dumped too? Perhaps legal aid will be restored for the most vulnerable. Perhaps the threat of closure hanging over our CABs and law centres will be lifted. Perhaps cut to compensation to victims of crime will be abandoned. But I doubt it. Instead, David Cameron is doing what a Tory leader does when in trouble, lurching to the right, tough rhetoric, and dare I say it, acting all butch. And we can guess what the new Justice Secretary, Chris Grayling, will say to the Tory conference next week. The same old tired Tory crime and justice speech. All rhetoric and no action. No evidence of what actually works. Retoxifying the brand. Tossing red meat to Tory backbenchers now in control of this weak Prime Minister. Locking up more criminals for even longer. But there will be no space to house them because this government have cancelled prison building and actually closed prisons. Human rights are bad because they're European. But Winston Churchill and British lawyers drafted the European Convention on Human Rights, of which Britain should be proud. Nothing but hot air. Talking tough to Tory backbenchers does not keep our communities safe. Conference, Labour must adapt to today's tough landscape, not over-promising, but deliverable policies matching our values of fairness and decency, rooted in evidence of what works, a sign of a true one-nation party, tough on the causes of crime, enabling government, local authorities, education, housing, health, social services and police to work together for the sake of our communities, rooting out deprivation and inequality. And tough on crime, catching, punishing and reforming criminals, sending a clear, unambiguous message about the wrongs of crime. Punishment and reform, hand in hand, that's smart on crime. Reform that reduces scandalous reoffending rates. You know, £11 billion is how much reoffending costs the country annually. For that, we could build and host an Olympics each and every year. And you know, rehabilitation isn't soft on crime, it's tough on reoffending, delivering less crime, less victims of crime, safer communities, and a cheaper justice system. But our prisons are full of the poorly educated with shocking levels of drug and alcohol dependencies. You know, over 70% of prisoners have 2 or more mental health problems. We've replaced the Victorian asylum with the Victorian prison. Festering in prison with serious mental health problems that can and should be treated is morally wrong. That's why in the next Labour government, I want to open a new front on the war on reoffending. For the first time ever, we will give a Justice Minister specific responsibility for rooting out mental health problems in our criminal justice system. And I want to go further. There are too many women in our prisons today. We need to reduce that. For 10 years, Labour's Youth Justice Board has presided over a halving of young people committing their first offence and a cut in the number of young people locked up by a quarter. Targeting specific groups, tailoring an approach to offenders' unique circumstances has been shown to work. Instead of abolishing the YJB, as this government proposed, I want to emulate its success. Some 28% of women in prison have no previous convictions, double that of men. Many women prisoners have mothers who are themselves in prison. Imprisonment separates 17,000 children from their mothers every year. This is a disgrace, and Labour's values mean we must sort it. And that's why Labour will begin work to look at introducing a Women's Justice Board working with women offenders in our prison and probation service. Conference. Evidence shows our battle to lower reoffending can be helped by the use of restorative justice, used not as an alternative to punishment, but designed to complement it, with offenders taking responsibility for their crimes, offering a level of reparation for the victim that punishment alone can't always deliver, can lead to greater confidence by victims and the public. And you know what? It saves money too. The Prison Reform Trust showed reoffending rates reduced by half in Northern Ireland's restorative justice programme. And I can announce this morning that under the next Labour government, courts will have to consider the option of restorative justice as part of any sentence handed down. Conference, this government is handing more than ever of our criminal justice system to private companies. A healthy mix of public, private and voluntary can bring new ways of working into prisons and probation, leading to more effective punishment and reform. But organisations reluctant to share the secret of their success in reducing reoffending with others is something that must change. Taxpayers are paying for the expertise, and I will demand full value. And it's also time to address a blind spot in our freedom of information laws. I am proud Labour introduced FOI, however awkward it can be. Not only will the next Labour government protect FOI, we will seek to extend it. For the first time, FOI will cover the delivery of public services by private companies. This includes our prisons, our schools, and our health service. Public, private, or voluntary, subjected to the same disinfecting transparency of FOI. Conference, on the 15th of November, the public give their verdicts on this Tory-led government's 29 months of law and order policies. It's a referendum on their police cuts. Labour's excellent 41 candidates are fighting to be police and crime commissioners. Vera Baird in Northumberland campaigning with characteristic vigour against domestic violence and rape. Lee Barron in Northamptonshire promising to ring-fence victim surcharge for victims' services. I'm not naming them all, don't worry. Tony Lloyd working with partners across the criminal justice system to make Manchester safer. Let's work together to get our fantastic Labour candidates elected as PCCs and then build on that success, demonstrating to the country we're the only party committed to a law and order policy that works rather than one based on overblown rhetoric. Labour, the one nation party of strong and safe communities, the party of neighbourhood and responsive policing, the party of open and fair justice and civil liberties, the party of constitutional reform in the interest of the nation, not ourselves, the one nation party that stands up for and protects the many, not the few. Thank you, Conference.